I used to work the overnight shift at a 24-hour gas station in a small town in Pennsylvania. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills while I saved up to go back to school. The station was tucked away on the edge of town, just off a rarely traveled highway, surrounded by miles of dense forest on one side and empty fields on the other. We didn't get a lot of customers between 1 and 5 a.m., mostly truckers, the occasional college kid coming back from a party, or someone getting fuel before a long trip. For the most part, it was quiet, peaceful even. But there's one night I've never been able to shake from my memory, and no matter how many times I tell myself, there must be some rational explanation, I know what I saw, and I know I'll never feel truly safe working nights again. It started like any other shift. My coworker Jenna handed off the keys and filled me in on what I needed to know. There'd been a power flicker earlier in the evening, but everything was back up and running. It was just after midnight when she left. I made a pot of coffee, set up the register, and settled in for another uneventful night. Around 2 a.m., a customer came in. He was tall, middle-aged, wearing a long tan coat that looked far too heavy for the season. It wasn't cold out. In fact, it was unusually warm for spring. His coat was buttoned up to the top, and he wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't say a word when he came in, just walked straight to the back, like he knew exactly where everything was. I kept my eye on him through the small mirror above the register. Something about his posture made my skin crawl. He moved slowly, deliberately, like he was pacing himself. After about 5 minutes, he came up to the counter with a bottle of water and a pack of gum. Still silent. I greeted him like I would anyone else, trying not to let my unease show. "That'll be $2.75, I said. He didn't respond. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a handful of coins, quarters, dimes, nickels, all dirty like they'd been buried somewhere. He dropped them on the counter one by one, never speaking, never looking at me directly. I counted the change, handed him his receipt, and he walked out without another word. I watched as he stepped outside, but instead of getting into a car or walking down the road, he just stood there, under the single streetlight by Pump 3. Just stood there, staring into the woods. I turned my attention to the receipt and realized something weird. The total was $2.75. He'd handed me $2.76, but there were only 9 coins. I recounted them. 3 quarters, 1 dime, 4 nickels, and 1 penny. That was 86 cents. I looked back at the door. He was gone. I got up and walked to the glass, scanning the lot. There were no cars, no people, just the humming of the overhead lights and the faint rustling of trees in the wind. A few minutes later, the phone rang. "Thanks for calling Pine Hill Gas. This is Daniel." There was silence. Then a deep, raspy voice said, "You shouldn't have taken his money." I froze. "Who is this?" I asked. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, trying to calm myself. Prank call. Had to be. Maybe someone had a friend come in and mess with me. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I kept glancing out the windows, checking the security monitors. Nothing. Around 4:30 a.m., I went outside to take a smoke break. The air was still, heavy. No wind. I lit a cigarette and walked around to the side of the building where the dumpsters were. That's when I saw the footprints. In the dirt behind the station, a single trail of deep footprints led from the woods to the back wall. But there were no footprints going back. No return trail. I followed them with my eyes until they stopped right beneath the security camera mounted at the corner of the roof. The camera was turned slightly, no longer pointing at the lot. I backed away, heart pounding. That's when I heard a soft clang, a metallic rattle from the roof above me. I looked up. There, crouched on the edge of the roof, was the man in the tan coat. He was staring down at me, head tilted, eyes wide open. I don't know how he got up there. I don't know why the cameras didn't catch him. I bolted inside and locked the doors, called the police. When they arrived 20 minutes later, there was no one on the roof, no one in the woods. But the cops saw the footprints. They reviewed the tapes. And here's the thing, there was no footage of the man at all. No record of him entering, no record of him at the counter. Just gaps, static, like something out of a movie. They dusted for prints. Nothing. The only physical evidence he'd ever been there was that handful of dirty coins. The station owner sent the change to a lab. They came back with a bizarre report. Some of the coins dated back to the 1800s. A few weren't even US currency. I quit that job 2 weeks later. I don't know who or what that man was, but I know he was real. I know what I saw, and I know he's still out there, waiting, watching, maybe even standing under another streetlight at another lonely gas station, just waiting for someone else to take his change. My grandfather owned a small, rundown cabin deep in the woods of Vermont. It wasn't much, just 2 rooms, an outhouse, and a wood-burning stove, but it sat on a beautiful piece of land. Surrounded by trees and with a small, crystal-clear lake nearby, it was the kind of place people romanticize until they actually spend a night there. Growing up, my family didn't visit the cabin much. My parents weren't into roughing it, but my grandpa practically lived there during the warmer months. After he passed away, the cabin sat untouched for years. My parents had no interest in it and planned to sell the land, but something about the place called to me. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was curiosity. Whatever the reason, I asked if I could spend a week there during my college break. They didn't argue. I drove up in late May, right after finals. The plan was to spend 5 days clearing out old junk, relaxing by the lake, and maybe getting some writing done. When I pulled into the dirt driveway, the place looked exactly as I remembered, if a little more weather-worn. The wooden walls were grayed from rain and snow, the tin roof streaked with rust, and the front steps sagged with rot. But somehow, it still felt inviting. I unlocked the door and was immediately hit with the scent of old wood, dust, and something slightly musty, probably from the dampness of spring. I opened the windows, swept the floors, and unpacked my things. By late afternoon, I was sitting on the front steps with a beer in hand, watching the trees sway and listening to the distant calls of birds. It felt peaceful. That first night, I barely slept. I kept waking up to faint creaks and shifting sounds. Chalked it up to the wind, the old wood settling, or maybe just my mind playing tricks on me. But around 3 a.m., I heard something new. A soft tapping on the outside wall of the cabin. It was slow and deliberate, like someone tapping with a single finger. I froze in bed, barely breathing. The tapping stopped after a minute or so. I didn't dare check. The next morning, I went outside and walked around the cabin. There were no footprints in the soft soil, no signs of animals, and nothing obvious that could have caused the sound. I tried to let it go. Being alone in the woods could mess with your head. That's what I told myself. The second night, I stayed up later, writing by candlelight. The sun had long since set and the woods outside had grown still. At some point, I noticed something strange, an intermittent clicking noise coming from the tree line across the clearing. I turned out the lantern and stared through the window. Click. Pause. Click, click. Long pause. Click. It wasn't a natural sound. It reminded me of someone pressing 2 stones together or snapping twigs in a rhythmic pattern. I stood there in the dark, watching, listening, barely blinking. Then the sound stopped. I waited. Suddenly, from just beyond the clearing, I heard what sounded like whispering. Not quite loud enough to make out, but unmistakably human. My heart thudded in my chest. I grabbed the axe we kept by the door and stood there for what felt like an hour, straining to hear more. Eventually, the whispering faded away. In the morning, I found something new. Lying in front of the cabin was a pile of stones, stacked in a deliberate way like a cairn. It hadn't been there the day before. I stood there staring at it for a long time. It wasn't just out of place, it felt like a message. But from who or what? That day, I walked the perimeter of the clearing, trying to shake the paranoia. I found more cairns, small ones tucked against trees, barely visible unless you were looking for them. 3 in total. I didn't touch them. That night, everything escalated. Around 1 a.m., I was jolted awake by a sound like heavy breathing, right outside my window. It wasn't an animal. It was too steady, too intentional. I stayed in bed, gripping the axe, waiting for it to pass. After a few minutes, the breathing stopped. Then came the knocking. Not on the door this time, but on every wall of the cabin. Tap, 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 moving in a circle. It felt like something or someone was walking the perimeter, knocking once on each wall as it passed. My skin crawled. I lit a lantern and held it close. The knocking stopped. I sat up all night, refusing to sleep. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up, locked the cabin, and drove straight back home. I didn't tell my parents anything, just said the place needed too much work and wasn't worth the time. 2 days later, I got a call from my cousin. He and his dad, my uncle, had gone to the cabin to retrieve some of Grandpa's old tools. When they got there, they found all the windows covered in small handprints, dozens of them, child-sized, pressed into the glass from the outside, like someone, or several someones, had been peering in. They thought it was a prank. I didn't argue, but I know better, because every now and then, I still hear it, the clicking, the tapping. I've moved 3 times since then, and still, once or twice a year, it finds me. I'll wake up to a single knock on the wall beside my bed, or hear whispering from the hallway in the dead of night. And once, just once, I found a tiny cairn stacked on my windowsill. I don't know what followed me home from that cabin, but I don't think it ever plans to leave. I've always believed fishing was a sacred sort of solitude, just you, the water, and nature whispering its quiet secrets. But there are some secrets that should stay buried. This happened last fall. It was mid-October, just as the air started to bite a little in the mornings and the trees gave up their final bursts of color. I took a trip out to Beartooth Lake, a quiet, mostly forgotten body of water tucked deep in the Adirondacks. Not many people know about it. That's what made it perfect. I was alone, as usual, just me and my aluminum boat, an old cooler full of drinks, and enough gear to last the whole day. The lake doesn't have a public dock or even a proper parking lot. You have to hike in a bit with your gear, which weeds out most of the weekenders and keeps it quiet. I got out on the water around 6:30 in the morning. There was still mist rolling across the surface, the kind that skims low like ghost breath. I paddled out toward the center, dropped anchor, and cast my line. Time passed slow and easy, just how I liked it. Caught a couple perch, nothing big, but enough to make the morning feel worthwhile. Around 10 a.m., I decided to move to a deeper part of the lake, near the north end where the trees hung low over the shore and the water ran almost black. It always felt colder up there, quieter too. The fish were better, but it felt different. As I reeled in to move, something bobbed near the surface about 20 feet from my boat. I figured it was driftwood or a trash bag someone left behind. I paddled a little closer, curious more than anything. It was neither. Floating half-submerged was an old backpack. Torn, molded. One of the zippers was busted, and its front pocket hung open like a mouth. I pulled it aboard using my net and set it in the back of the boat. I planned to check it out when I got to shore. Maybe it had an ID, maybe I could return it. Or maybe it was just a piece of junk. That's what I told myself. I anchored again and cast my line, but something was off. The woods didn't feel right. The usual rustling, chirping, distant snapping, gone. It was like everything was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A splash behind me. Not just a fish breaking the surface, but something larger, heavier, like someone stepping into the lake. I turned around, but there was nothing. Just ripples and a few drifting leaves. I scanned the shoreline, still nothing. No animals, no people, not even a bird in the sky. I chalked it up to nerves and went back to fishing. Another splash, this time closer. I spun around, nearly dropping my rod. My boat rocked with the motion. Still nothing. I was beginning to feel watched, but the lake was deserted. It always was. I decided I'd had enough for the day. I started to pack up when the air shifted. It got colder, heavier. The clouds had rolled in out of nowhere, dark and low, as if the sky itself had lowered to listen in. I looked toward the backpack again, and something about it made my stomach turn. Water was dripping from it, thick, dark, almost tar-like. That's when the smell hit me. Rancid, metallic, wrong. I grabbed my oar and shoved the pack back into the lake. The second it splashed down, I heard something I will never forget. A voice, low, raspy, guttural, whispering something I couldn't understand. It was coming from the water. I turned toward the sound, and there, barely visible beneath the lake's surface, was a face. Pale, bloated, staring up at me from below. I screamed and nearly toppled the boat trying to get away. My hands shook as I paddled, the oar slicing into the water like a lifeline. I didn't stop paddling until I hit the shore. I dragged my boat out, grabbed what I could carry, and hiked back to the truck in a blind panic. The whole time I felt like something was following me. something that didn't move in footsteps, but in thoughts. A presence pressing in against the back of my mind. I didn't go back to Beartooth Lake. But that's not where the story ends. A week later, I got a knock at my door. A man in a tan jacket flashed a badge, Forest Service. He asked if I'd been to Beartooth Lake recently. I lied and said no. He stared at me for a second too long. Then he said they found something. A ranger spotted a backpack floating near the shore. Inside were personal items, waterlogged documents, and a knife with initials carved into the handle. But what they found next was worse. A body, or what was left of it. It had been underwater a long time, teeth missing. Skin, bloated and gray. They couldn't ID it right away, but they had their suspicions. A man had gone missing there over a year ago. Hiker, never found. They asked me again if I'd seen anything. This time I told the truth, or most of it. I told them about the backpack, the face. The voice I left out. The ranger nodded, said that Lake had a history, that every few years something or someone was reported missing. Sometimes they resurfaced, sometimes not. He left me with one piece of advice. If you pull something out of the water that wasn't yours, put it back. Some things are meant to stay buried. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, staring, waiting. And sometimes when I sit in my backyard at night, I swear I can hear the soft splash of water, miles away from any lake. I used to work night shifts at a security company, stationed in various vacant properties or industrial complexes around my town. It wasn't exactly a thrilling job, but the quiet nights and solitude made it easy money. Most nights were uneventful, just long hours of walking the perimeter, checking locks, logging my rounds. But one night still plays in my head like a movie I can't turn off. The property that night was an old department store that had gone bankrupt during the pandemic. It was a 2-story building located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a large empty parking lot and a couple of chain-link fences. The store had been closed for nearly 2 years, and there were rumors going around town about break-ins and even squatters using it to sleep. My job was simple: walk the perimeter every hour, make sure no one had snuck in, and log everything. There were motion detectors installed on the inside of the building, and my handheld device would buzz if anything was triggered. That particular night started normal. I arrived just before 9 p.m., grabbed the keys and flashlight, and parked myself at the small guard station near the side entrance. I did my first round, checked all the doors, windows, and service entrances. Everything was quiet. Everything was locked. Around 10:30, I went on my second round. I had just turned the corner at the back of the building where the loading dock was when I noticed something strange. There was a faint scraping sound, metal on concrete, coming from inside the building. I stopped and listened, holding my breath. It was faint, distant, and rhythmic, almost like something being dragged. I radioed it in, like we were supposed to, and waited for the motion detector system to buzz. It didn't. That was odd. If someone had broken in, the sensors should have gone off unless they had somehow disabled them. I made my way around to the front entrance and unlocked the door. It creaked open, echoing in the massive, empty store. I stepped inside, flashlight leading the way. The air smelled like dust and old plastic. The shelves had all been cleared out, but you could still see outlines where things had once been stocked. The security lights provided a soft glow, barely illuminating the far walls. I started walking down one of the main aisles toward the back, my boots crunching lightly on the gritty floor. Every few steps, I'd pause and listen. Nothing. Then, as I turned into the former clothing section, my flashlight caught something. A shopping cart. It was just sitting there in the middle of the aisle. I stood still, scanning the area with my light. There shouldn't have been anything left in here. We were told it had been cleared out. But the cart wasn't empty. There was a black garbage bag stuffed inside it, tied at the top. I stepped closer. The bag didn't move. It just sat there, bloated and lumpy. Something about it made me uncomfortable. I couldn't hear anything, no breathing, no rustling, but I kept my distance. I wasn't about to open it alone in the dark. I turned around, planning to go back and radio for backup. But before I could take a step, I heard something that chilled me. A laugh. Low. Raspy. And it came from the other end of the aisle. I turned back around, flashlight aimed at the noise. but there was no one there. The aisle stretched about 50 feet to the other end of the store, and I could see every inch of it. No movement, no shadows. My skin prickled with adrenaline. I slowly backed away, steps careful and deliberate. As I reached the main walkway again, my radio buzzed loudly in my vest. I jumped. A motion sensor had just triggered. Zone 2, which was, of course, the clothing section. I looked back. The shopping cart was gone. I froze. My throat felt tight. My hand gripped the flashlight so hard my knuckles hurt. I had just seen it, not even a minute ago. I didn't hear the wheels, didn't hear anything move. I turned and started walking quickly back toward the front entrance. No shame in getting out and calling for backup now. But as I passed one of the old dressing rooms, I noticed the curtain was drawn shut, one of the only ones still intact. It was swaying slightly. Something was behind it. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just stared at it. The motion sensor on my radio buzzed again. Zone 3. The front entrance. The same entrance I had just come through. Someone was trying to box me in. I slowly turned around and began moving toward the loading dock instead. There was a secondary exit there, one I had the keys for. I figured if I could get out that way, I'd be fine. I just needed to keep my calm. But just as I reached the loading dock hallway, I heard something else. Footsteps. Fast. Slapping hard against the tile floor. Not behind me. Ahead. I stopped. I couldn't see anything. The hallway was long with several turns. My flashlight flickered once, then held steady. Then I saw it, a figure, standing at the far end of the hallway, facing me. It was tall, wearing a long, dark coat. I couldn't see the face, couldn't see the eyes, but it was still, too still. I took a step back. It took a step forward. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I got to the side exit. All I remember was bursting through the door, gasping for air, and slamming it shut behind me. I ran to my car, locked the doors, and called my supervisor. He showed up with another guard about 15 minutes later. We searched the whole building. Nothing. The shopping cart was gone. The garbage bag, gone. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. The motion detector logs were the only proof that something had happened. I never took another shift at that location. A few months later, the store was demolished to make way for some condos. But sometimes when I drive past the site at night, I swear I see something out of the corner of my eye, just for a second. Something watching, waiting, and I still wonder what was in that bag, and who or what was trying to keep it hidden.